Not many people have toppled a house, but I have, and here is the story. It was my first log cabin project. Naively, I dove headlong into this, a project that ended in disaster, but also a project that led me to create this YouTube channel. Because I have to share my mistakes, I think it can help people. In my world, nothing was impossible. I was going to lift this house on my own with the help of jacks, then replace or renovate the bottom 2 to 3 rows of logs on the house. But everyone told me, you can never do that on your own. I should have listened, but I truly believed I had a chance to pull it off. But looking back, I now realize that the project was doomed from the start. I had never done anything like this before. I had never built anything more than birdhouses. But how hard could it be? Incredibly naive. But with a burning desire inside me to make it happen, I threw myself into this project. The house is about 39 feet long and 19 feet wide. The height to the ridge is around 13 feet. My plan was to first bolt 3 by 3 inch timber beams around the entire house, both on the inside and outside. This is where I made my first mistake. I had far too few of these, so I had to improvise with thicker planks of varying quality and length. Step 2 was to drill holes in these, 2 holes per beam, and then insert 16mm threaded rods straight through the beams and walls, which would then be secured with washers and nuts. Step 3 was to begin lifting with my 2 mechanical jacks that I had purchased specifically for this purpose. Ideally, I would have liked to lift at more than 2 points at the same time, but I only had 2, so I had to move them around. Step 4. Once the house was lifted, I would need to prop it up on the inner timber beams. This is where I made my biggest mistake. I had prepared far too little, and the propping material was far too weak. Just look here. Step 5. Once the house was lifted and resting on the inner beams, I would be able to remove the jacks to make space for the work. Step 6. Now I would be able to lift out the bad logs to either repair or replace them. Well, that was the plan. And I really thought the plan wasn't that bad. But how in the world did I think I could lift heavy logs and fit new ones in all by myself? Some of these logs must have weighed over 150 pounds or more. I'm strong, sure, but there's no way I could have done this alone. And yet, somehow, I still got myself into this project. What was I thinking? I had driven 150 miles to get good timber to repair the house with. I don't have a monster truck, so my Ford S-Max diesel had to work hard going uphill. It was heavy, very heavy, not to mention how heavy it was to lift everything off. I bought a total of 8 logs, and 4 of them were going to be joined together to make 2 long bottom logs. I used a template to join the pieces. These logs were 8 by 8 inches thick. Now what? I had prepared beams in the walls to lift with, and I had also joined together 2 new bottom logs with a total length of about 12 meters. All the material was ready. But before I could start, there was one problem. A big problem. In the center of the house stood an old broken stove. It was part of the house's structure, and it had to be torn down in order to lift the house.
I'll tear it down myself, no problem. It'll take me an extra day or 2. Yeah, right.
Stupidity. I could have had the strap right through the window of the car. But this is how this channel will look. Mistakes on mistakes, and maybe something good now and then. My wife and I struggled for a long time dismantling the chimney, which was massive, 7 by 7 feet at the base and stretching up to the peak. Time was slipping away. Fall arrived, and I started realizing it was pointless to try lifting the house now. The winter came, and the winter passed. In autumn, totally overloaded after resting the whole winter, we were back in this project. The stove had been dismantled, and large stones had been moved from the wall. Now finally, after a long time of preparation, we would begin. Now it was time to lift the house with the jacks and replace the bad logs. I was stressed because everything had taken so long. Not the best mental attitude for a job like this. I began lifting. It was an unreal feeling to see the house rise off the ground. Would it really work? I was thrown into tunnel vision, rushing back and forth with the jacks like a scalded rat. Everything was happening fast, way too fast. Suddenly, I had lifted the whole house and torn out the bad logs. But now what? This is where my planning ended. How was I going to attach the new logs here? Should I start with new logs as the base and set the house down on them? Or should I begin building on the logs where they hung and secure the new ones with ratchet straps? I felt lost now. How could I have been so naive? I needed to sleep on it. The next morning, I told my wife, I just need to lift a bit more so I have room to fit the new logs. She replied, "You're not lifting any more now." For during the night, the house had slowly started to slip off the support materials. I didn't see the danger right away, but when I went to make a final adjustment with the jacks, disaster struck. Slowly, the house began to slide off the supports. With a creaking sound that can't really be described, the entire house moved about 2 feet and settled down onto the lawn. Disaster. My whole world came crashing down. A year of preparations, countless purchases, everything was wiped out in a matter of seconds. What do I do now? In a second, I became a shadow of my former self. I sank down into a chair, contemplating the sight before me. How could it go so wrong? How could I have been so careless? Because I'm a fool who believes he can handle anything. Just an hour after the collapse, I had already contacted a few neighbors in the area. I urgently needed to borrow a larger machine to lift the house. People around here are helpful, if you dare ask. I managed to get in touch with a man who owned a forestry machine and was willing to help. I immediately began marking the frame and preparing for the dismantling. I used masonite boards, marking them with a waterproof marker. The letters indicated the name of the wall and the numbers showed which log it was. In hindsight, this was exactly how I should have done it from the beginning. Mark the house, take it down, and then rebuild. But it's easy to be wise in hindsight. The monster machine arrived in the yard just 2 days later. We began by carefully removing the roof and the eaves. The operator was skilled, doing his best not to damage the house more than necessary. The beams I had screwed into the house were holding the logs together, so we had to use a chainsaw to cut them apart where we could. But in several spots, especially inside the house, we didn't dare go in, due to the risk of collapse. It looked brutal, but it was over in just a few hours. What remained now was a large pile of debris, roof remnants, stones, gravel, and from the house, this was all that was left.
It took me several days to clean everything up. I had now spent countless hours on this, and for what purpose? All I had left was an empty gravel pile. Don't do my mistakes. I'll keep doing them because I never give up. Don't follow me. I moved stones for a week. Some were too heavy to lift, the heaviest perhaps weighing up to a ton. I like lifting stones. It's monotonous, heavy, and worthy.